the dust did not settle. It hung in the air like a shroud, a constant, gritty reminder of all that was lost. Elara paid for the dying man and his children with the last of her husband's legacy, a stack of worn bills that felt heavier than gold and as light as ash. She bought a patch of cracked earth, a skeletal barn, a house that groaned with the wind, and the hollowed-out silence of a family waiting for its end. The ranch was called Redemption Creek, a cruel joke played by a long-dead optimist. There was no creek left, only a scar in the land where water once ran. And there was no redemption here, only the slow, grinding process of surrender. She stepped out of the wagon, her black dress absorbing the punishing sun. Her own grief was a physical thing, a stone in her chest that had been there for 2 years, ever since the fever took John and the hope of any child with him. That grief had hollowed her out, made her a vessel for silence and solitude. Now, she had chosen to fill that emptiness with the grief of others. He sat on the porch, a ghost propped in a chair. Caleb. His breath was a shallow rustle of leaves, his skin stretched taut over bone, but his eyes, when they met hers, held a flicker of the same defiant fire that had once burned across these 1,000 acres. Beside him, 2 small figures stood like frightened sparrows, a boy and a girl, their faces smudged with dirt and sorrow. They were no older than 6. Twins. They were part of the transaction, the living, breathing heart of the desperate bargain. The man's gaze fell to the money she held in her gloved hand. He did not want it, but he needed it. Not for himself, but for them. A final provision. "They are Mara and Leo," he rasped, the words costing him. His hand, a fragile claw of bone and vein, gestured weakly toward them. "They don't speak much." Not since their mother Elara nodded. She understood the language of loss. It needed no translation. She walked past him, placing the money on a small, unsteady table inside the dark house. The air within was stale with sickness and despair. She looked at the 2 children, who had not moved, their eyes wide and dark, fixed on her as if she were an apparition, another bad dream in a life now full of them. The boy, Leo, clenched his small fists. The girl, Mara, simply stared, her face a perfect, porcelain mask of trauma. Elara felt the stone in her own chest shift. It was not dislodged, but it made room. For them. This was not a purchase. It was a promise. She had not bought a ranch. She had inherited a duty. Her isolation was over, shattered by the weight of 2 small, broken souls who now belonged to her as surely as the dust that coated her boots. The first week was a war waged against decay. Elara worked from before the sun crested the bluffs until long after it bled into the horizon. She moved with a grim, relentless rhythm, her body fueled by a purpose that had been dormant for years. She mended the sagging fence line with wire and sheer will, her hands, once soft, becoming calloused and raw. She cleared the trough of stagnant, foul water, hauling bucket after bucket from the near-dry well until it ran clear enough for the 3 remaining, skeletal cattle. Each swing of the hammer, each heave of a broken plank, was a prayer against the silence. Inside the house, Caleb watched from his bed by the window. He did not speak, but his eyes followed her every move. It was a silent, solemn communion. He saw the resilience in the set of her jaw, the strength in her shoulders that she probably didn't know she possessed. He saw her tending to the grave of his wife, pulling the weeds with a tenderness that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. He saw her lay out food for the children, simple meals of beans and hard bread, and ask for nothing in return. The children were her shadows, ever present and just as silent. Leo, the boy, was a small storm of suspicion. He would kick at the dirt when she walked by, his little face contorted in a permanent scowl. He once hid her hammer, and she spent an hour searching for it, her patience a placid lake he could not stir. She found it under the porch step, said nothing, and went back to work. His defiance was a shield, and she knew better than to try and tear it down. She would simply wait for him to lower it. Mara was different. The girl was a ghost. She moved through the world without making a sound, her eyes vacant, fixed on a point in the middle distance that only she could see. She would sit on the porch steps for hours, clutching a small, faceless doll made of corn husks. Elara would leave a cup of milk beside her, and hours later, it would be gone. One evening, as a cool breeze offered a brief reprieve from the heat, Elara was sitting on the porch, stitching a tear in Leo's shirt. The needle moved in and out, a small, rhythmic motion. Mara was there, on the bottom step. Elara did not look at her, did not speak, but she felt the girl's gaze shift from the horizon to her hands. The steady, quiet act of mending something broken held the child's attention. For a full minute, Mara watched. It was the first time Elara had seen the girl focus on anything in the present. It was a flicker, a tiny spark in the vast darkness of her trauma. It was enough. Hope, Elara was learning, was not a grand sunrise. It was the slow, almost imperceptible lightening of a long night. The dog, a scruffy beast named Dust, was the first to sense it. He stood near the edge of the porch, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his gaze fixed on the long, empty road. Elara stopped her work, her hand resting on a fence post she'd just secured. She followed his gaze. For a long moment, there was nothing but the shimmer of heat rising from the plains. Then, a speck appeared. It grew slowly, resolving into the shape of a man on a fine, black horse. He rode with an unearned confidence, his posture straight, his hat clean. He did not belong to this world of grit and struggle. He belonged to a world that took. The rider came to a stop a dozen yards from the house, his horse kicking up a small cloud of the very substance Elara fought against every day. The man was tall and broad, his face clean-shaven and handsome in a way that felt predatory. His clothes were of good quality, his boots polished. He looked at the mended fence, the cleared yard, and then at Elara, his eyes lingering with a dismissive arrogance. "Caleb," he called out, his voice smooth and loud, ignoring Elara completely. "No use hiding in that shack. Your debt is due from inside the house." A weak cough was the only answer. The man swung down from his horse, his polished boot sinking into the dry earth. He finally deigned to look at Elara properly, his lips curling into a sneer. "And who is this? The new help?" "He can't afford you. I am Elara," she said, her voice even, betraying none of the cold dread coiling in her stomach. "This is my property now." The man laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Is that the story he told you? This land, this house, it belongs to me. A debt for my sister, his late wife. Everything he has is collaterals." He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. Including the children. At the mention of them, a primal fire ignited in Elara's chest, burning away the last vestiges of her quiet grief and replacing it with something harder, something forged. Leo and Mara, hearing the strange voice, had appeared in the doorway behind her, peering out like frightened deer. The man, Silas, saw them. His expression softened into a mask of false affection that was more chilling than his anger. "There they are. My niece and nephew. Come on out. Your Uncle Silas is here to take you to a proper home." The children shrank back into the darkness of the house. Silas's mask dropped. "They are my blood. My responsibility. Not his, and certainly not some stray he picked up." "They are not property," Elara said, her voice low and dangerous. "And this is their home." "This is a tomb," Silas spat, gesturing at the weathered house. "He's dying. You're a fool if you think you have any claim here. I'll be back with the sheriff. And I will take what is mine." He mounted his horse, his movements full of righteous fury. He stared down at her, his eyes cold and final. "You have until sunset tomorrow." He wheeled the horse around and galloped away, leaving behind a suffocating silence and the certainty of a coming storm. The air grew thick and heavy that night, the sky a bruised purple that promised a storm but offered no rain. It was a reflection of the suffocating tension within the small house. Caleb had not eaten. He lay in his bed, his breathing more ragged than ever, his gaze fixed on the ceiling as if he could see Silas's shadow still lingering there. Elara sat in a chair beside him, the mending forgotten in her lap. The children were asleep in the other room, a fitful, troubled sleep. She could hear Leo muttering, Mara whimpering softly. The sound was a physical pain in Elara's heart. She had fought so hard to build a fragile wall of peace around them, and in one afternoon, Silas had torn it down. "He will do it," Caleb whispered, his voice a dry crackle. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The sheriff is in his pocket. He has money. Influence. I have nothing. He turned his head on the pillow, his eyes finding hers in the gloom. They were filled with a desperate, terrible clarity. He sees them as assets. My debt to his family. He cared nothing for his sister when she was alive, but now she is his righteous cause. I will not let him take them, Ilara said. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, as solid and unmovable as the bedrock beneath the dying land. Caleb looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a hired woman or a stranger, but a guardian. He saw the fierce, unwavering resolve that he no longer possessed. A plan, desperate and final, formed in his failing mind. It was his last bullet, his final stand. There is one way, he said, pushing himself up slightly on his elbows, the effort costing him dearly. One thing that would sever his claim. One bond the law would have to recognize over his. Ilara waited, her hands clenched in her lap. Marry me, Caleb breathed, the words almost lost in the oppressive silence. Marry me, Ilara. Before the sun sets tomorrow. Become my wife. Become their mother, in name and in law. He can claim kinship over a dying man's children, but he cannot claim them from his widow. The proposal was not born of love or passion, but of something far more primal, the desperate need to protect the innocent. It was a contract of the soul, a strategic maneuver in a war for two small lives. It was heartbreaking and profound, a final, defiant act of a father's love. Ilara looked from Caleb's earnest, pleading face toward the doorway of the children's room. She thought of Leo's clenched fists and Mara's vacant eyes. She thought of the fragile spark of hope she had nurtured. She would not let Silas extinguish it. She would become a fortress. A wife. A mother. A widow, all in the space of a day. She met Caleb's gaze, her own eyes clear and resolute. The storm outside finally broke, a clap of thunder shaking the small house. Yes, she said. I will. The morning arrived washed clean by the storm, the air crisp and the sun casting long, sharp shadows across the damp earth. It was the day of the wedding and the day of the reckoning. There was no preacher, no white dress, no celebration. There was only the solemn gravity of the promise made in the dark. Caleb, with a strength that seemed drawn from the very core of his will, managed to rise. Dressed in his only clean shirt, he stood on the porch, leaning heavily against a post, his face pale but his eyes burning with purpose. Ilara stood beside him in her simple black dress. It was a funereal garment for a bridal vow, but it felt appropriate. She was burying her old life to begin this new one. The children, sensing the monumental weight of the moment, stood quietly by the door, watching. At mid-afternoon, they saw the dust cloud on the horizon. This time there were two riders, Silas and a portly man with a tarnished star pinned to his vest. They rode up and dismounted, their expressions confident, final. It's over, Caleb, Silas said, stepping onto the porch. Sheriff Miller is here to enforce my claim. The children are coming with me. The sheriff looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting between Caleb's gaunt face and Ilara's stoic one. Caleb, the judge sided with him. They're his kin. Not anymore, Caleb interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm. He reached out and took Ilara's hand. Her fingers wrapped around his, a small, warm anchor in the storm. This is my wife, Caleb declared, his voice ringing with a strength that shocked everyone, most of all Silas. Ilara. We were married this morning, by the laws of God and our own vows. These are her children now, as much as they are mine. You have no claim on a widow's family. Silas stared, his mouth agape. He looked from Caleb's hand holding Ilara's, to Ilara's unyielding expression, to the sheriff, who now looked deeply uncertain. A marriage, even one made on a deathbed, was a sacred and legal bond that trumped a brother-in-law's claim. It was a checkmate. This is a farce. Silas raged, his face turning a blotchy red. You cannot do this. I have done it, Caleb said simply. He squeezed Ilara's hand. He looked past Silas, to the vast, open land, and then his gaze settled on Mara and Leo. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. He had saved them. He had done his duty. "She is my bride," he said, his voice softer now, "meant for her. And they are safe." The setting sun broke through the clouds, bathing the porch in a soft, golden light. It was the light of a promise fulfilled. The sheriff, seeing the unassailable truth of the situation, shook his head. "My hands are tied, Silas. They're her family now. Let go." Defeated, his face a mask of pure hatred, Silas threw one last venomous look at Elara before mounting his horse and riding away, his victory turned to dust. Caleb sagged against the post, his final reserve of strength gone. He passed away in his sleep that night, as the last light of the sunset that had sealed his promise finally faded from the sky. Elara was a widow once more, but this time, her grief was not an empty cavern. It was a quiet space filled with a sacred duty, a solemn vow, and the soft breathing of two sleeping children in the next room. The seasons turned, each one a testament to Elara's quiet, unyielding labor. The ranch, Redemption Creek, began to live up to its name. Under her patient hands, the cracked earth softened. A small garden flourished with stubborn vegetables, adding color to their simple meals. She had traded 2 of the skeletal cattle for a milk cow and a half-dozen chickens, and the quiet clucking and lowing became the new sound of home. The silence that had once defined the children began to recede, like a slow tide going out. Leo's scowl softened into a thoughtful frown, and then, on rare occasions, a quick, shy smile. He became her helper, his small hands eager to fetch a tool or scatter feed for the chickens. He learned the rhythm of the work, the language of the land. His anger had found a new purpose, to build, not to break. One afternoon, as Elara was hanging laundry on the line, the white sheet snapping in the prairie wind, Leo came and stood beside her. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, he simply reached out and took her hand. It was a small gesture, but it held the weight of 1,000 unspoken words of acceptance, of trust, of love. Mara's journey back was longer, her path more winding. She remained in her quiet world for months, watching, always watching. Elara never pushed. She would talk to the girl as she worked, narrating her day in a low, calm voice, asking for nothing in return. She would brush Mara's long hair every evening, the gentle strokes a conversation of their own. Then, one spring morning, a wild foal from the nearby hills wandered close to the house, its mother watching from a safe distance. Mara, holding her cornhusk doll, stood on the porch, mesmerized. The foal took a hesitant step closer. "Pretty," a tiny voice whispered. Elara froze, her heart stopping. She turned slowly. Mara was looking at the foal, a flicker of wonder in her eyes. She had spoken. The word was a key, unlocking a door that had been sealed for years. From that day on, more words followed, small pebbles dropped into the pool of her silence, creating ripples that changed everything. Elara stood on the porch that evening, the same porch where she had made her vow. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and rose. In the yard below, Leo was showing Mara how to skip a stone across a puddle left by the afternoon rain. Their laughter, clear and bright, drifted up to her. Dust, the old dog, lay at her feet, his tail thumping a contented rhythm against the wooden planks. She was a widow. She was a bride. She was a mother. The land before her was no longer a symbol of her loss or an empty expanse to be conquered. It was a home. It was a future. She had come to this place hollowed out by grief, and here, in the heart of another's sorrow, she had found her own redemption. The stone in her chest was gone, replaced by the fierce, warm, and profound weight of a family, forged not by blood, but by a promise made at sunset.